It's going to be a great show when we can get it done, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Let's see here. Well, it's not showing me as an option to bring Zoom into Ecamm. I think I can go from Ecamm to Zoom.
You can use Ecamm's camera in Zoom, and you can use Ecamm to broadcast your Zoom call. So while it's Ecamm in, yeah.
Yep.
Shoot. Got one more idea. Let me click. See if I can.
No, I was afraid that second earlier, and I was looking at this thinking, yes, I want to stop it. I'm like, no, I can't. That doesn't do
Hello, everyone, and welcome again. Well, I mean, we were live for a little bit, but now we're back for real. We're back. We had a little bit of technical difficulties today, but that's okay. Me and Scott are going to wing it. It's all right. It's going to be good. So today I'm excited to talk to Scott Propp, who is an expert in working with product teams, and we're going to talk about all things that you need to know to build a culture of experimentation in your team. So before I get started though, I do want to mention that, we are hiring at Foundry and, that's that one. There it is. And we're hiring. So come and check out foundrymakes.com/careers. Scott, how are you today? Thank you for your patience in the technical difficulties. We're here and live.
Yeah, fantastic. It's great to be here, Kurt. Thanks so much for working through them.
Yeah, and so tell me about what you do, Scott. You work with product teams, you coach them, you work with organizations. What's the main type of work you do there?
Yeah, the main work I do is with at the intersection of teams, projects, and plans, working with groups that need to do the cross-product and cross-team work primarily.
Yep.
And been doing that for about the last decade. Prior to that, did a ton of work on corporate side, leading those same teams.
Good, cool. So if we're talking about creating a culture of experimentation today, and I know you've created some framework around kind of the idea of how to build that culture, because you and I have talked about this before. There's this kind of argument of teams versus timing, right? Is the product going to be successful because of the timing or because of the team? Now, no spoilers, but I'm personally a big fan of a team can manage any timing. But I do know people that are vehement about that timing matters more than team. Well, I'd like to get your take on that, Scott.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to back us up a notch
Yeah, go ahead.
Before I do. So I think one of the things we need to think about is that the tension on teams, the tension on organizations to create products and services has changed a lot in the last 24 months. And I've had a chance to walk side by side with a number of firms through that. And then most recently in the last couple of weeks, I've had detailed phone calls with C-level folks in a number of firms to really understand that. And if you think about it, 2019 was like the last year on the books where we had what I'd call standard internally driven, market driven product development.
Yep.
And then 20 and into early 21 has all been some flavor of response to the pandemic. And again, the sketch I make for folks is between 19 and 21, there's like a moat of chaos, right? That happened.
Yep.
And really three pathways that organizations have gone through there. So there's the retail folks, right? It was like rocket fuel, right? They brought their roadmaps in 5 years, basically moved all their investments up. So they're sitting there going, okay, now how do we do all the integration that we need to do? We got all this great work done.
Right.
Second path through there was firms like food. I've got a couple of clients in that space, but they had a huge shift from their commercial food operations into retail almost overnight, which cost them a ton of retrenchment inside. And frankly, now that they've made that shift to retail, many of them are in the process of shifting back, right? So it's a redirect path. And I'm seeing that in things like automobile dealerships, things like that as well. And then there's a third group, right, that got lost, right? They went in, and one firm went in, and a different firm's coming out, right? We're still figuring that one out. And in these three tensions, I think lots of teams are really trying to get a handle on where are we, what are we trying to do, and how can we efficiently make that next step forward.
Yeah. So do you feel that because of that, like you said, moat of chaos, right? So where is that now, and where do you see that going the rest of this year and the next year? Is the moat getting deeper and wider? Is it draining? What do you see happening?
Yeah, I think all of the above, depending on the organization.
Okay.
What I hear back through the phone calls these days is people are figuring out what work might look like, and I say might with precision. I mean, there is no consensus yet.
Yeah.
So depending on the group, depending on the demands on that group, there's still a wide variety of approaches. I've got several manufacturing clients that have been back in the house since April. I've got a number of other clients that won't be back in the house until this fall. So, yeah.
That's great. So let's talk about some of the work you do with these organizations, Scott, because I know you have this Strive framework I wanted to talk a little bit about and have you discuss. Now, I know we don't have the visuals for it, but let's talk through the acronym Strive and why is that? Why have you seen that be powerful and impactful for these product teams?
Yeah. So I do a lot of work with a variety of firms across a lot of different places. But one of the things that's common across that is there tends to be two teams that live in different domains. The first domain I'll cover is the operations domain. And that's a space where you literally, every minute you don't use is a minute less that goes into supplying your customers products and services. So if you think simplistically, right, think about a factory, you lose a whole shift, that shift is lost forever, right? You never get a chance to go pick that up again. Typically side by side in the same firm, there's this other group of creative, right, which is where most of us live, right, on the creative side. How do we create new value propositions that are going to be installed in that operation? And it's a completely different space, right? It's motivated by insight and activating awareness, right? So, you may work for 10 hours to have one moment of insight that could make the year, right? Yep. Very different than the operational environment. So to make that clear, I've developed this program called STRIDE. It's an acronym. ST stands for strategy and tactics on the left-hand side of the diagram. R is what I call reality, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. It's just the next step over. Yeah. And then on the operations side, I for integrate, D for deploy, and E for extend. And there's a gap between R and I, and that's where we hand off between the creative team and the operations team. So the fundamentals there are, I work very hard with teams to help them have a very productive reality prior to handover to operations, design great experiments, design great betas, have an opportunity to get lots and lots of feedback out of those. Yep. And in doing that, right, we don't get lost, right, in that gap between.
And so in that reality, do you see in that is that kind of like, is that in the planning stage where we're like, this is, like one thing we do at Foundry a lot, right, is we kind of do Goldilocks sort of estimating, right? Like if money wasn't an object, here's what we could actually do, right? And if we
Right.
had no money, here's what we could do. Okay, what's that middle Goldilocks sort of space that we can live in? Is that similar to what you're talking about? Like we can dream all
Yeah.
these different plans and come up with these different things, but what's the reality going to be?
Yeah, we have slightly different approach. So when we come out of the ST side, the strategy tactics side, one of the last things we do is we stack rank all the risks. I'm sure you guys do something similar to that. And when you stack rank the risks, you finally get a sense of, hey, we really ought to spend time blowing up these risks before we actually cross into any kind of operations environment. So when we stack rank those by risk, we make sure that our investments, and these don't have to be huge investments. These can be relatively quick and hard hitting activities to go blow those up in sequential order. Once you've got those stacked ranked in some, we call it, tornado diagram, right? Fancy name for an inverted stack, right? But
Yep.
but it allows you to deal with those one by one. And by the time you get to the bottom of that, the group looks at each other and goes, you know what, we understand everything we're going to understand prior to actually taking this thing out and sharing it with a client.
Okay. And then the integrate. Now, obviously, deploy is really important.
Yeah.
But how you mentioned there's that gap there, but what's the between the gap between the integration and the deployment part of it? Because I find that deciding on what you're actually going to push the go button on sometimes can be just as difficult as getting through the strategy section, right?
Right. Yeah. The tricky bit. So the challenge of getting across that divide really begins at the outset when a cross-functional team is staffed. One of the issues is that the brilliance of the operations team is spread across a number of individuals. Usually, it's not like we can recruit one person to come in and be the all-knowing, all-seeing individual that can advise the creative side on exactly what to do. But what we do is make sure that the sponsor of the team has the ability to cross into that group and access a handful of assets, right, that can be involved early in the process that will pick up and get that team informed. So when the baton handoff really needs to happen, at least there's awareness that it's coming,
Yep.
and also that someone has overviewed it prior to the day you showed up on the doorstep. And you'd be surprised. I mean, there's a lot of offline work that suddenly pops up like a missile out of the ocean, right?
Yep.
And the ops team's like, where did this come from?
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted to kind of I was leading that into kind of the topic for today was being able to create that culture of experimentation. And do you feel that like, because you have a framework that allows for people to be less afraid of that experimentation? Because what I find is that, experimentation, people get scared of because it can lead to failure, right? And nobody wants to fail, right? This is too important, too big to fail, our jobs are on the line, all that sort of stuff. So experimentation is a little scary because I could screw up, or I could look stupid, or we could look dumb to our customers, or all these different things. So is what I'm taking from you is that if I've got something a little bit more checks and balances in terms of a framework, it would allow for that experimentation to take place. Is that what I'm getting, Scott?
Yeah, that's exactly accurate. There's
Okay.
a prequel framework that I use to the Stride framework that helps people get the right project, the right team, and the right plan in place, even entering into the Stride framework. And the key with that is to do some pre-work to make sure your project is anchored appropriately, right? Do we have internal capability and competence that really underpins this thing? Yes, no, right? Have we really informed the project to the best of our ability, right? We've got to bring the best external insights in. And C, is it far-sighted enough? I see a lot of internally defined projects that honestly don't match quite to even parity with where the industry is at that moment, much less being far-sighted, right? So those three elements are like table stakes to make sure you got the project. Then the next element is the team, right? Really going through the team, like we said a little bit ago, making sure that we have the visionaries present, that we have ops leaders present, that we have people that are into data and can actually create it, analyze it, right? Live in it, swim in it, and do it well.
Yep.
Along with people that have a global viewpoint that can integrate the whole thing. So there I look at, is the team equipped, right? Is it a team in name only? Is it a bunch of individuals that got thrown into a conference room and given a to-do?
Right.
Or are they really equipped, right? Do they have shared goals? Are they working together, right, in a crisp way? Were they curated, right? Are they the best possible people in the firm to be on that team? Or were they just available? And that sends a huge message to the firm. Everyone knows when the top talent's on the top priority. And then lastly, chartered, right? We make sure that the sponsor really has written down on paper what they expect of the team to avoid drift. You'd be surprised how many rudderless teams there are out there, and kind of exploring their remits on the way to solving the problem.
Yeah, because I mean,
So
well, like you said, you throw in a bunch of titles into a room, and that is not a team, right? You know, like, well, we need the lead developer, we need the lead UX person, and we need the lead, and then now we're good because we have all the titles represented in the room. So we should be able to just come out with a roadmap that makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, what really happens then, right, is you really discover who you've got if you're doing real work. Very quickly, it becomes evident, right? We've got people speaking on behalf of groups rather than speaking on behalf of subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
And, there's all the usual, juxtaposition and political dancing that's going on in that moment, right? But it's really clear that we didn't do the job of getting the right folks in there.
Well, that's why I think good product leadership is key because, all those different teams are coming in with their agendas, right? But to your point about the being political, we all want to get to the same space, right? We all want to move the same direction, but because our teams are sometimes siloed from each other, or they're not, like you said, they're not intentionally built. They're more systematically built based on their deliverables, right? Versus who they are as individuals contributing to the overall team. So I can see that. And then, the customer, and how does the customer fit into the framework you're talking about? Where is the customer? And I'm guessing if I could pull up your screen, I could see where they tie in, but I'm going to have you explain, Scott, where does the customer tie into this Strive framework that you've got?
Sure. Yeah, actually the client is woven in at a couple levels. One is at the insight layer. We do a deep dive on the customer, both the customer's explicit but also implicit and unstated desires as well. And we keep after that until we get to something we call leverage direction, meaning that we have an insight, that it's an insight that we have traction for, that we can actually take advantage of. And that we've done what we call phase one to be able to actually see the value all the way through in that insight, and that's huge. Without that kind of rigor in terms of having you can call it a North Star, I call it a medium-term objective, but without having that kind of element, that main piece that we're wrapping the project around. Again, we can be replicating rather than transforming, which is what we all want to do.
Right. Well, and so if I am trying to empower the team to experiment, what I've found is that you do have to build a culture of trust, I guess, right? You have to know that other people may have your back if things fail or fall down, or not necessarily fail. Maybe they just start to lean over and they look like they're going to fall, but somebody's going to be there to help you catch it. It doesn't have to be a failure, right? It could just be something that you're testing and maybe it's not going well. Maybe because you've got a strong team, you can reach out to these other people to say like, hey, where do you think we should tweak this? What is the data showing you? When you look at this data, what does it say to you? How do you interpret it? Because I think that's something that's huge when it comes to the types of frameworks you're talking about, because I'm acquiring data as I'm going through this process, right, Scott? So how am I then, using that information in this framework to kind of help steer decisions or employees, or even how I'm explaining this to customers?
Yeah. Well, so great question. So once you've completed that phase one that I just talked about regarding the insight and actionable insight, we have a second phase we call inform. And in that phase, we actually open up the aperture a little bit. And with the goal of making sure that we're looking around the space of the product as well as in the space of the product. And usually in that, it tends to empower the team a bit more, because you get, first of all, third-party input. So nobody's, reputation on the team is on the line. You're receiving objective external feedback that allows you to sort through, and then with the frameworks we use, actually make some deeper discussions and decisions that you wouldn't normally have. There's magic in getting that context built in a broader way. So you're looking at substitutionary products and some other things as well. That tends to really open up the dialogue and allows that trust to begin to happen, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're in a defensive mode, it's really hard to contribute. But if everybody's on the same side of the table examining this thing that came in from a third party source, right now we're all on the same plane, and that helps a lot.
Yeah, because let's talk about product leadership then, because I think, and I've said it lots of times on this show, and you and I have talked about it. There isn't really a standard for the role of a product owner or a product manager. It seems to be product by product, company by company. Even geolocation. I see different approaches. I mean, if I go to LinkedIn right now and pull up the role of product manager, it's really hard to find anything that ties all the different job descriptions together, other than it has the word product in there, and maybe some data, maybe some analytics, maybe it'll say customer here and there. But how do I start to build that team and build that, that leadership, right? I almost feel like it has to start from top down, that you've got to have a strong product leader in that role, regardless of what their title is, product manager, product owner, or whatever, So how do I get the right person in that role, Scott? How do I know if they're the right person? Because I went out and I'm building this product team, and I don't know. Where do I start? How do I find these people?
Yeah, no, it's not easy. I'm doing a project right now with a firm that has a very mature organization, and their core product is being disrupted. So now suddenly what used to be a good enough process, where they had an engineering lead and someone from marketing and a little insight from sales to create product specifications. Now suddenly they need an internal champion that can go upstream and create this next organization. And it's been challenging in that these people have been in spaces for a decade, right? So they've been doing the same thing in the same way under the same process for a long time. So it's been substantially disruptive.
Yeah, I see that
in that case, we created three scenarios actually, but they came down to two of how we could build this new capability. And it really came down to, just at a high level, one was getting a talented individual to seed the group, right? So we're going outside the group to bring in somebody that has not just the title, to your earlier comment, right, but actually go deep in their background and make sure that they had been in the size of organization that we're looking at, had actually built a group up before and not just run one that was already there. Some of the fundamental details of good leadership, making sure that this person knew how to cross cultural boundaries without blowing up landmines and those kinds of things. So that was one scenario. The second scenario was take the best possible internal candidate, And to everyone's surprise, this was not somebody that was in the existing business group, right? This was somebody from outside the business group that had those skills and abilities, had crossed boundaries, had created new stuff in the face of internal resistance.
Yep.
And this is playing out real time, so I can't tell you how it turns out yet.
Sure.
But going deep with an objective viewpoint is the kind of stuff that you know people hire outsiders to have a look at, because they're irreversible decisions. These paths are, you know, you're going to take one or the other.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly important, I'm sure, as your clients know as well, right?
Yes.
To have the right objective viewpoint at those moments can make all the difference.
Yeah, because it can be such a unicorn position, right? Like you mentioned, you know, places that I've seen that have lost a great product manager, for example, like the product can sometimes have a really hard time recovering from that. And it really trickles down to the end customer impact very quickly, you know, when, so tell me about that, Scott, in your opinion. Like, how can I used to have a boss that used to tell me everybody's replaceable. So, you know, is it to what we talked about earlier about having that strong framework that would allow me to not risk, you know, putting all my eggs in one basket on this product manager, you know, having some sort of repeatable process, maybe? I mean, what's your take on if I'm a CEO or a founder, and you know, I'm nervous. I can't count on this person being here for 20 years. How can I sleep at night?
Yeah, no, what we're talking about now is that third leg of the stool that I call plan, but it's really a strategy of how do we build this capability into the organization, right? And this is a big deal. I see, and I tend to grade firms on 4 layers here. One is just, you know, one individual sacrificial internal effort, unsustainable, right? But periodically we're able to pull together the band and create something fresh, right? But usually that leader that does that either becomes so burnt out that they have to step back for a while, or they get good at it and they leave the firm, right? This individual heroics is not a good model. The second layer of this is what I call task alignment. That's where you can get a group together and they actually agree on what needs to be done. It may not be efficient, and it's usually fairly clunky, but they can actually go forward and get the job done.
Yeah,
and that's probably the majority of firms that initially work with. With some work, you can usually get to that next layer where you've got your peers actually working together, where there's, you know, where you don't have to go up the organization to get something done. You can actually work laterally. That is a huge step forward. And then on top of that, there's a piece that people really deserve to get to, and that is where the organization's really on mission, right? So where the product team really feels deeply connected to the client, deeply connected to the core of the organization, and adjudicates all those stresses and tensions, right, in a way that really good things come out. And you know, in each of those layers, right, there's significant breakthrough elements that can be done. For instance, right, just orchestration, right? How well do we hand things back and forth across the organization without dropping the baton? That's something we look at in a deep way to make sure that, you know, we isolate what layer we're at, we decide where we want to go and what investment we want to do. So taking this all the way back to what you asked, how do we embed this capability in the organization, right? It's always a cascade of people, processes, and capabilities, right? And one of your usually they're very personally oriented. That's the default, right? Somebody leaves, we go all the way back to mediocrity, and we have to rebuild it again, right? And that's where a good assessment tool can help you get a handle on how much of this is actually in processes, right, that we can actually repeat, and how much of this actually goes, you know, it goes out the door with the individual. As you go up that pyramid I described, you get the lateral agreements, you get the mission as built into the product organization. There you almost move forward without missing a beat, right? It's fantastic to watch those organizations move forward. And in fact, you see product leaders actually go on to become business ops leaders in other places in the organization just because it's such a core capability. So Yeah, that's I think that's the key, is to really objectively ask yourself how much of this is, Bill, and how much of this is built into the
Yep.
organization if Bill leaves.
Well, and that's why I think it's important to have outside consultants come in, and what I hear you describing is kind of a maturity model, right, of my product sort of world, right?
Yep.
Having people from the outside come in and kind of, I found a ton of value that in a lot of organizations I've been a part of over the years, where you have a kind of an outside team or consultant come in and kind of do this sort of telling you where you're at in terms of these processes on a maturity level, versus maybe the rest of the world, or whatever else those things are. And I found a ton of value in having people do that, because it really lets you know very clearly what areas you should be focusing on, and what areas you shouldn't be.
It's a great investment. Yeah, it's a great investment, as you suggest. I think the element that is most useful is having what a really good external resource will do for you is give you an external framework as a measuring stick, rather than doing the stacked ranking stuff that always results in very messy personnel stuff inside the organization.
Yeah, right.
So you can tell that someone's a pro when they can come in and sit with two people and they are both looking at the same framework, objectively agreeing, yeah, here's where my performance is, here's where I need to get better.
Yep.
And can work layer upon layer. There's a lot of people that can sit down and perhaps diagnose an individual performance element, but in terms of working with a multi-layer organization as complex as a product group, I really encourage people to get somebody that's lived in that environment, understands how to select and coach, because there's a lot of context involved, there's a lot of nuance involved, and everyone's got two buckets. I say you can either carry the water or the gasoline, and you got to be really specific about which one to use.
Right. Yeah, you've got to be very specific about which one you're going to use. And so the last thing I want to talk about, Scott, is again, I want to jump back on that area of innovation within a product team and being able to spark that. Is it how do you coach people on balancing the needs of the customer, right, versus sort of your internal capabilities? And where I'm going with that meaning is that I see a lot of people chase after shiny objects because maybe they have a very loud customer. Maybe they have one that is maybe 30% of their revenue, and that customer is very loud about certain features and quality and things that they want to see happen with the product, or availability, or these different things. But you also have the team that's striving to, obviously from a financial position, it's better to have the more peanut butter spread across out there, right? Versus having that big looming customer. But, how have you coached people in maybe situations like that? Because I do run into a lot of product people that are in this situation where, they're not a 100-year-old company where, maybe they're just a couple of years old and they do have one of those sort of behemoth clients in there that are paying for a lot of the revenue, but they still want to innovate. They still want to change things. And if you're being led by the customer for innovation, where do you make that determination? Because I find so many people struggling with it. Am I making sense where I'm kind of going with this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and a very relevant one, right? We've all been in that conference room when, just to grab a random example, right? Latin America sales guy says, I absolutely need this, right? And in my mind, I'm going, well, yeah, but you're less than 2% of the sales that go out of this organization.
Exactly, right.
But you're about to pull the whole product roadmap sideways, right? And so it's again in those moments where where someone like yourself or myself can jump in and help to speak a little balance there. The other thing that's really useful, I call it a future capability process that I do with firms, and we do it about every 3, sometimes 5 years, but it helps to have an anchor in the ground, a forward-looking roadmap that gives you some insight into where you're headed, both on the capability side as well as a product side. And if you've got that being overviewed by a decent steering committee, and by decent, I mean not necessarily by title, but again, by capability and insight, then and they can make decisions at a more integrated level, at a board level. Those are the kinds of internal controls that can keep you out of the, we did all this work on this, all these man years in this product and sold 4, right? And that happens. I mean, I get calls like that, you almost feel sorry in retrospect. But you need to go through the decision-making process and sort through, how did that one get through? Was it an aberration, or is that something that could be happening right now?
Right. Yeah, because and I've seen it just like you, right? Like we've got this roadmap, we're steady, we're holding on, teams working great together. Then all of a sudden, Microsoft shows up and says, "Well, if you can integrate it with, Excel,
Yes.
we'll buy, 500 seats." And you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is great." Let's change everything and change the core. Again, like it's hard to say no to that stuff, but how do you, I don't know if there's a great answer, but I mean, how do you maintain that balance between, the roadmap that you felt was strong for the long term, right, versus this giant opportunity that landed in your lap? It's very challenging.
Yeah, it really is, and that problem will never go away.
Right.
I think honestly the challenge is to really objectively look at it. And usually, if you build a really strong product capability in the organization, you get those wise, grizzled veterans that may be around for 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
That can provide some insight.
The graybeards.
Yeah, the graybeards, right? They can speak a little bit of truth. But you're right. I mean, even in that example, I've literally seen that example where you were going to be tagged on to some optional menu 14 layers deep, and how much should we invest in this?
What an opportunity!
The truth is that it's the equivalent of the attic with the butterflies in it, and it's never going to see the light of day.
Right. That makes sense. All right, Scott. Well, I want to thank you. Thank you for your patience with I'm sorry. Next time we will get the visuals figured out. We'll have you back on the show because I'm really excited to have you walk through them, because I've got some visuals of my own that I want to share with you too and get your take on. So we'll definitely have to do that next time. All right. So Scott, if you've got an amazing blog, anybody watching this, I definitely say you should go to scottpropp.com and check out his blog. I've got links in the description down below with links to some of his blog posts about some of the things we talked about today. So Scott, tell me, if I want to know more about you and what you're doing, where's a great place to connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great resource, Scott Propp, and as you said, scottpropp.com. Then if you grab any one of my blog posts, you'll find all my contact info, cell phone numbers, and so forth. So I'd be more than happy to reach out for a conversation with anybody that is in this space that would like to hear a little more about what we talked about today.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Scott. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, Kurt.
All right, everyone. So just to close out the show, thank you again for spending time here. We are hiring at Foundry. Yes, it's amazing. What a shocker. We're hiring. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your patience. Working on a new studio, as you might see behind me. It's coming together. Next couple of weeks, we've got some really fun shows happening. So I would love for you to join me. Make sure you subscribe, hit follow, hit the buttons, like and all that stuff. Really helpful. All right, we'll see you next time.